Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, you're not alone. For the next 2 hours, let your thoughts fade as these unsettling stories fill the silence. If you're watching this right now, tap the like button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Let the darkness settle and let the stories take over. The idea came from Alex, as most of our adventures did. We'd been dating for 3 years, and the pandemic had taken its toll on both of us. Alex worked as an ER nurse, and I'd spent the last 18 months trapped in Zoom meetings as a corporate lawyer. We needed an escape, something to remind us that the world was bigger than our apartment walls and screens. "Let's go somewhere with no cell service," Alex suggested one night, scrolling through hiking photos on Instagram. "Somewhere we can actually breathe." The Cascade Mountains in Washington seemed perfect. Remote enough to feel like true wilderness, but with established trails so we wouldn't immediately perish as inexperienced hikers. We weren't exactly outdoorsy people, but we weren't completely helpless either. Or so I thought. We packed our new tent, sleeping bags, enough freeze-dried meals for 4 days, and first aid supplies that Alex insisted upon. The drive from Seattle took nearly 5 hours, the last 30 minutes on a dirt road so rugged I feared for the underside of our rented SUV. The ranger station at the trailhead was unmanned, just a wooden board with weathered maps and warnings about bear safety. "I checked the weather before we lost service," Alex said, shouldering a backpack that looked comically large against their slim frame. "Clear skies all weekend." The initial hike was exhausting but exhilarating. The trail wound through ancient pine forests, occasionally offering breathtaking views of distant snow-capped peaks. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing near a stream, the perfect campsite. Alex proved surprisingly adept at setting up our tent, while I fumbled with the portable stove. That first night remains one of my most cherished memories. We ate surprisingly decent pasta primavera from foil packets, shared a flask of whiskey, and fell asleep to the gentle sound of running water and distant owl calls. For the first time in months, I felt peace. The next morning, feeling adventurous, we decided to go off-trail, just a little. The stream seemed to lead toward a small valley that wasn't marked on our map. Alex had a decent compass and swore we could easily find our way back to the campsite. "Just a quick exploration," they promised. 2 hours, tops. We should have known better. Everyone who's ever disappeared in the wilderness probably said something similar. The stream led us deeper into increasingly dense forest. The sunlight filtering through the canopy created dappled patterns on the forest floor, and we spotted deer tracks, mushrooms of impossible colors, and once the quick rustle of what might have been a fox. "This is amazing," Alex said, stopping to photograph a particularly impressive old-growth cedar tree. "I feel like no one's been here in years." That's when we noticed the fence. It was almost invisible, green chain link nearly consumed by vegetation, but unmistakably man-made. We followed it for maybe 50 yards before finding a gate hanging partially open, its padlock long rusted through. "Federal property," Alex read from a faded sign. "No trespassing." In retrospect, we should have turned back. But curiosity is a dangerous thing when you're already feeling invincible from the thrill of wilderness. "Probably some old Forest Service station," I suggested, pushing the gate wider. "Let's check it out." Beyond the fence, we found ourselves on what had once been a gravel road, now little more than twin ruts with grass and saplings growing between them. We followed it uphill for perhaps half a mile before the trees suddenly opened to reveal a small complex of buildings tucked against the hillside. 3 single-story structures surrounded a central courtyard. Their architecture was utilitarian, concrete and metal, with small windows and flat roofs. No logos or identifying marks, just numbers stenciled beside each door. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. Nature was reclaiming it inch by inch. A young birch tree had broken through the concrete of the courtyard, and vines covered much of Building 2. "Weird place for a research station," Alex said, examining what appeared to be a rusted satellite dish on one roof. "Miles from anywhere." "Maybe that was the point," I replied. We approached Building 1 cautiously. The door hung partially open, stuck on warped flooring. Inside, we found what looked like administrative offices, desks overturned, filing cabinets emptied, papers rotted into unreadable pulp on the floor. Rain had come through broken windows for many seasons, leaving water stains and mold across what remained of the ceiling tiles. "Look at this," Alex called from what might have been a break room. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a team of researchers, perhaps 15 people in total, standing proudly before the buildings when they were newly constructed. The date at the bottom read, "Project Isolation Team, 1983. "The Cold War era," I noted. "Could have been anything. Geology, meteorology, maybe even something military." Alex nodded. "Let's check the other buildings." Building 2 was locked tight, but Building 3's rear door had been forced open long ago. Inside, we found what was clearly a laboratory space. Unlike the administrative building, this one seemed to have been evacuated in a hurry. Equipment still sat on counters, covered in dust. Glass containers, their contents long evaporated, lined metal shelves. A bank of what looked like specialized refrigerators lined one wall, their doors hanging open, powerless for decades. "This is incredible," Alex whispered, running a finger through dust on what appeared to be an early model computer terminal. "It's like they just walked away." The main laboratory space opened onto several smaller rooms. Some contained what looked like medical equipment, examination tables, monitoring devices I didn't recognize. Others appeared to be living quarters, with metal-framed beds and small personal items still in place. "Check this out," I called, finding a notebook that had been protected from moisture by being inside a desk drawer. Most pages were filled with handwritten equations and notes too technical for me to understand, but occasionally there were personal observations. Day 47. Subject demonstrates increased isolation anxiety within expected parameters. Behavioral modification protocols adjusted accordingly. Day 53. Sleep deprivation combined with controlled sensory input producing stronger reactions than visual stimuli alone. Dr. Mercer suggests focusing protocols on sustained isolation periods. Day 60. Ethics Committee visit postponed again. Feldman insists we're making too much progress to risk interference at this stage. "What do you think they were doing here?" Alex asked, examining what looked like a sensory deprivation chamber in the corner of the lab. A small room with thick walls and no windows. Its door hung open, revealing a single chair bolted to the floor. "Nothing good," I replied, increasingly uneasy. "Let's head back to camp. It'll be getting dark soon." As we turned to leave, Alex paused by a heavy door marked Sub-Level Access, Authorized Personnel Only. Unlike most doors in the facility, this one was metal and appeared to have multiple locking mechanisms, though they were disengaged now. "Should we?" Alex asked, hand already on the handle. My instinct was to say no, but I nodded anyway. The door opened to reveal a concrete stairwell leading down into darkness. Alex pulled out a flashlight. Just a quick look. The stairwell descended about 20 feet to another door, this one hanging partially open. Beyond it lay a corridor with rooms on either side. Unlike the upper floor, these spaces were completely stripped. No equipment, no furniture, nothing to indicate their purpose except their layout. Each room was approximately 10 feet square, with what appeared to be observation windows facing the corridor. The walls were bare concrete with visible water damage. At the end of the corridor stood another door. This one was different. Reinforced steel with a viewing window and multiple locks. It was closed. "I think we should go," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Alex nodded, suddenly looking as uncomfortable as I felt. "Yeah, this place gives me the creeps." As we turned to leave, we both heard it, a faint sound from behind the steel door, like something shifting, or perhaps the building settling. "It's just the wind," Alex said quickly. "This place is falling apart." We hurried back upstairs and out into the fading afternoon light, both pretending we weren't spooked. By the time we found our way back to our campsite, darkness was falling and we were exhausted. We barely spoke as we heated our dinner and climbed into our tent. That night, I dreamed of empty rooms and being trapped in darkness. We didn't discuss the research station the next morning. Instead, we hiked in the opposite direction, following a ridge that offered spectacular views of the valley. We took photos, identified wildflowers using Alex's guidebook, and even spotted a black bear in the distance. A thrilling but safe wildlife encounter. By evening, the strange facility felt like a distant, slightly unsettling memory. But I woke in the middle of the night to find Alex sitting upright in their sleeping bag, listening intently. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "I thought I heard something," they replied. "Like voices." We fell silent, straining to hear above the natural sounds of the forest. Just as I was about to tell Alex it was nothing, I heard it too. A distant sound that didn't belong. Not animal, not wind. Almost like voices? Indistinct but unmistakably human. "It's probably just other campers," I reasoned. "Maybe there's another campsite nearby that we didn't notice." Alex shook their head. "No, it's coming from that place we found." "That's impossible. No one's been there for decades." But Alex was already pulling on boots and a jacket. "I need to know what it is." I wanted to argue, to insist we stay in our tent until morning, but something in Alex's expression stopped me. There was an intensity there I'd never seen before, a strange compulsion that seemed out of character. "Fine," I sighed, reaching for my own boots. "But we stay together." The forest at night was a different world. Our headlamps created small bubbles of visibility beyond which everything was impenetrable darkness. We navigated mainly by memory, following the stream until we found the rusted fence. The sounds grew more distinct as we approached. What sounded like muffled conversations, occasional metallic noises. The research station looked even more ominous in darkness. Moonlight cast sharp shadows across the courtyard, and the windows of the buildings were blank eyes watching our approach. The sounds definitely came from Building 3, the laboratory we'd explored earlier. "Alex, I really think we should wait until morning," I pleaded. But Alex was already moving forward, drawn toward the sound with unusual determination. "Don't you want to know who's in there?" I didn't like the strange quality in Alex's voice, but I followed, unwilling to let them go alone. The sounds grew clearer inside the building, definitely human voices now, coming from below, from the sub-level we'd explored. This time, Alex didn't hesitate at the stairwell door, descending with purpose while I followed reluctantly. The corridor of empty rooms was different in darkness, our flashlight beams creating grotesque shadows on the water-stained walls. The voices were now clearly audible, though I couldn't make out words. At the end of the corridor, the reinforced door stood open. "It was closed before," I whispered, but Alex didn't respond, moving forward as if entranced. Beyond the door was a large circular room, different from all the others we'd seen. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in a dark material I couldn't identify in the dim light. In the center of the room stood several people in what looked like hazmat suits, working around some kind of equipment setup. One of them spotted us and called out, "Who's there? This is a restricted area." Suddenly, bright lights blinded us. I raised my hand to shield my eyes. "What are you doing here?" demanded a stern voice. "This area is federal property. We're just hikers," I stammered. "We found this place by accident yesterday, and—" "How long were you in this facility?" the voice interrupted. "Did you touch anything in the lab?" "No," I said quickly, but Alex remained silent beside me. The lights lowered slightly, and I could now make out 3 individuals in protective gear. They weren't hazmat suits exactly, but heavy-duty respirators and protective clothing. One was pointing some kind of scanner at us. "Both showing signs of exposure," said a woman's voice from behind one of the masks. The female subject more significantly. "We need to take them in," replied the first voice. "Standard quarantine protocol." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Exposure to what?" "Sir, this facility was involved in experimental research into psychological warfare techniques during the Cold War," explained the woman calmly. "Specifically, the effects of certain chemical compounds on human behavior and perception. The facility was abandoned after an accident in 1985, but the contamination remains in the soil and groundwater. We're part of an EPA cleanup operation." "Chemical compounds?" I repeated, horror dawning. "We drank water from the stream near here." "That's unfortunate," she said, her voice clinical. "The compounds developed here were designed to increase suggestibility and cause hallucinations. They're particularly effective when absorbed through the digestive system." I turned to Alex, who had been unnaturally quiet. Their eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated. "Alex?" I touched their arm. "Are you okay?" "I can hear them," Alex whispered. "The test subjects, they never left." "That's the hallucinations starting," the woman explained. "The compounds affect different people at different rates, but they often manifest as auditory hallucinations first. Your friend appears more susceptible." "We need to get both of you to a decontamination facility," said the first man. "Please come with us." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, blood tests, and endless questions. We were taken to what they called a field decontamination site, about 5 miles from the research station, a collection of temporary structures staffed by people in various levels of protective gear. They separated us immediately. I was stripped, showered in some chemical solution that burned my skin slightly, given scrubs to wear, and placed in a small room with a hospital bed. A doctor who introduced himself as Dr. Whitman explained that I was showing minimal signs of exposure. "You're lucky," he said, reviewing my blood work. "The compound levels in your system are relatively low. You'll experience some disorientation, possibly mild hallucinations for 24 to 48 hours, but there should be no lasting effects." "What about Alex?" I asked. Dr. Whitman hesitated. "Your friend consumed significantly more of the contaminated water. The effects are more pronounced." "What does that mean? Can I see them?" "Not yet," he replied. "We're still working to stabilize their condition." Over the following hours, I learned pieces of the truth from various medical staff and a government official who introduced herself only as Miss Howard. The facility had been part of Project MKUltra, the CIA's infamous mind control program that ran from the 1950s through the early 1970s. This particular site had continued operating unofficially after the program was supposedly shut down, focusing on developing compounds that could induce extreme suggestibility and dissociative states. The primary compound, codenamed IX-63, was designed to break down the barriers between conscious and unconscious thought, Ms. Howard explained clinically. In small doses, it made subjects highly suggestible. In larger doses, it caused hallucinations and paranoia. In the highest doses tested, it led to complete dissociative breaks. Essentially, the subject's personality would fragment. "And this is what Alex was exposed to?" I asked, horrified. She nodded. "The research was terminated after an accident in 1985. Several researchers were exposed to massive doses when a ventilation system failed. They experienced complete psychological breaks. 3 committed suicide. 2 others had to be institutionalized. The facility was evacuated and sealed, but over time the compounds leached into the groundwater. Why wasn't the area marked more clearly? A rusty fence and a faded sign? People could wander in. It was supposed to be, she admitted, but budget cuts, changing administrations, things fall through cracks. We've been monitoring the site, but this cleanup operation only began 3 weeks ago, when testing showed the contamination had spread further than previously thought. I was finally allowed to see Alex the next day. The sight shook me to my core. They were restrained to a hospital bed, eyes darting around the room as if tracking invisible movements. Their speech was fragmented, alternating between lucidity and ramblings about the others and the test subjects. "They're still here," Alex insisted when they recognized me. "In the walls, in our heads, they put them there." "It's the compound," Dr. Whitman explained quietly. "It's causing auditory and visual hallucinations. The restraints are for their own safety. They tried to claw at their own face earlier, claiming they could feel something under their skin." "Will they recover?" I asked, fighting tears. "We hope so. The compound does metabolize eventually, but the psychological trauma may linger. They'll need specialized care." Over the next week, I was released, while Alex was transferred to a facility in Seattle. The official story given to our families and employers was that we'd encountered a rare fungal pathogen in the wilderness that caused neurological symptoms. Not entirely a lie, but far from the truth. I was allowed to visit Alex regularly. Some days were better than others. They would recognize me, seem almost normal, then suddenly start talking about the voices or the others who were watching us. The doctors called it drug-induced psychosis and assured me that with time and proper medication, Alex would recover. 3 months have passed now. Alex is home, but changed. The hallucinations have mostly subsided, replaced by nightmares and occasional paranoid episodes. They can't work yet. They startle at unexpected sounds and sometimes stare at empty corners of rooms as if seeing something I cannot. I found a support group for families of MK Ultra victims. Most are much older, children and grandchildren of people experimented on decades ago, but they understand what we're going through. They've taught me that healing is possible but never complete. Last week, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a thumb drive and a note that simply read, "The truth deserves to be known." The drive contained hundreds of classified documents about the facility we discovered. Research protocols, subject reports, chemical formulas for IX-63 and other compounds. I don't know what to do with this information. Exposing it might bring justice for what happened to Alex and countless others, but it might also put us in danger. The government official who called herself Ms. Howard never gave me her card, and the facility where Alex was initially treated doesn't seem to exist in any official capacity. For now, I focus on helping Alex heal. We've moved to a new apartment, somewhere with no basements or dark corners, somewhere with open spaces and natural light. We don't hike anymore. We don't talk about what happened in the mountains. But sometimes, when Alex thinks I'm not looking, I catch them staring into the distance, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only they can hear. And I wonder if we ever really left that place behind, or if some part of us will always be trapped in those empty rooms, forever changed by what humans are capable of doing to each other in the name of progress. If you're hiking in the Cascades and come across a fence with a faded no trespassing sign, turn back. Some secrets are buried for a reason, and some experiments never truly end. I still remember the moment we arrived at Sanibel Beach. the sun hanging low in the July sky, casting long shadows across the pristine white sand. My wife Ellie had spent months planning this trip, our first real family vacation since our youngest Noah was born 3 years ago. Our daughter Lily, now 8, had been counting down the days, her excitement contagious as she repeatedly asked how many sleeps were left. The beachfront rental we'd splurged on stood among a row of similar vacation homes, all with that classic coastal architecture that dominated Florida's Gulf Coast. Ours was a pale blue 2-story with white trim and a spacious deck that offered an unobstructed view of the water. It was substantially more expensive than our usual travel accommodations, but Ellie had insisted we treat ourselves. "We deserve this, Mark," she'd said, "after everything we've been through." And she was right. The past few years had been challenging, with my company's downsizing, her mother's lengthy illness and eventual passing, and all the accumulated stress that came with raising young children while managing 2 careers. As we unloaded our SUV in the late afternoon heat, I noticed how the golden hour light transformed everything it touched. The children's faces glowed as they raced up and down the wooden steps leading to the beach, their exhaustion from the 6-hour drive suddenly forgotten. Ellie caught my eye and smiled, that rare, unguarded smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, but had seen less frequently during our recent difficult years. That first evening, we ate dinner on the deck, feasting on seafood takeout while watching the sun sink below the horizon. Noah clapped his chubby hands at the sight of pelicans diving into the water, and Lily talked incessantly about the seashells she planned to collect. When the kids finally went to bed, Ellie and I stayed outside, sharing a bottle of wine and listening to the rhythmic sound of waves breaking on the shore. "This is exactly what we needed," she whispered, leaning her head against my shoulder. I nodded in agreement, feeling more relaxed than I had in months, perhaps years. The constant background anxiety that had become my daily companion seemed to have stayed behind in Minneapolis. Here, with the salt air filling my lungs and the sound of the ocean in my ears, I could finally breathe. Little did I know how quickly that peace would shatter. Our first full day at Sanibel Beach began with the kind of morning you see in travel brochures. The sky was cloudless, the water a clear, inviting turquoise. Lily dragged us out of bed at 7, already dressed in her swimsuit and clutching her beach bucket and shovel. "Daddy, you promised we'd build the biggest sand castle ever." I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when we set up our spot on the beach. Ellie methodically applied sunscreen to the kids while I arranged our chairs, umbrella, and cooler. All around us, other families were doing the same, claiming their temporary territories on the sand, setting up elaborate encampments of umbrellas, canopies, and beach toys. The beach was bustling, but not overcrowded. Sanibel was known for its family-friendly atmosphere and spectacular shell collecting, drawing visitors from across the country. The shoreline curved gently with well-maintained public access points, interspersed between the vacation rentals and low-rise condominiums. As I helped Lily with her sandcastle, I noticed a middle-aged man standing at the water's edge, about 50 yards down the beach. There was something distinct about his stillness amid all the activity, children running and splashing, teenagers playing volleyball, parents chatting and taking photos. He wore khaki shorts and a blue button-down shirt that seemed oddly formal for the beach, and he just stood there, hands in pockets, staring out at the horizon. I dismissed the thought. Not everyone had to be as boisterously engaged as my family was that day. We spent hours in and out of the water. Lily proved to be a confident swimmer, while Noah preferred to splash in the shallows, giggling as the gentle waves lapped at his legs. Ellie alternated between reading her novel under the umbrella and joining us in the water, It was around 2 in the afternoon when I first noticed the lifeguard's troubled expression. The young woman kept scanning the water through her binoculars, then checking her watch and speaking into her radio. Other lifeguards were doing the same up and down the beach. "Everything okay?" I asked as one walked near our spot. "Just monitoring the conditions," he replied with a professional smile. "We've got a moderate rip current advisory today. Nothing to worry about if you stay in the designated swimming areas and keep an eye on the kids." I nodded, making a mental note to be more vigilant. Rip currents were no joke. I knew that much from the public safety announcements that played on the rental property's TV. Later that evening, while the kids were showering off the sand and salt, I stepped onto the deck with a beer in hand. The beach was emptying as families packed up for the day. The man I'd noticed earlier was still there, now sitting on the sand, his gaze fixed on the water. As I watched, he stood, walked to the shoreline, and waded in up to his knees, then turned to face the row of beach houses. For a moment I thought he was looking directly at our rental, at me. But the distance was too great to be certain. When I mentioned him to Ellie over dinner, she shrugged. Maybe he's a local who comes to watch the sunset, or someone who lost a loved one at sea. People deal with grief in different ways. Maybe, I agreed, but something about him had unsettled me. That night, I woke to the sound of Noah crying. As I comforted him back to sleep, I glanced out his bedroom window. The beach was mostly empty, except for a few late-night strollers, and that same solitary figure, now walking slowly along the shoreline in the moonlight, his path taking him directly in front of our house. The next morning brought subtle changes. The sky remained blue, but dark clouds gathered on the horizon, a forecast of the afternoon thunderstorm typical of Florida summers. The waves were higher, crashing onto the shore with more force. Yellow caution flags fluttered beside the lifeguard stations, a warning about hazardous swimming conditions. "Can we still go in the water, Daddy?" Lily asked, disappointment already creeping into her voice. "Just the shallows today, Princess. The waves are too rough for swimming out deep." Despite the restrictions, the kids enjoyed themselves, jumping over the smaller waves and collecting shells. Ellie and I took turns supervising them while the other relaxed. During my break, I struck up a conversation with an older couple who owned a condo nearby and spent every summer at Sanibel. "This place has changed so much," the woman said, gesturing toward the row of vacation rentals. "When we first started coming 20 years ago, most of this was undeveloped." Her husband nodded. "The tourism has been good for the local economy, but the development has its costs. More people in the water means more risk." "What do you mean?" I asked. "These beaches have always had dangerous rip currents," he explained. "That's why there are so many warning signs and lifeguard announcements. But tourists don't always listen, especially the younger ones." "Richard, don't lecture the young man," his wife admonished gently. But I was interested. "Have there been accidents here?" The old man's face grew serious. "There are always accidents when people don't respect the water. Last summer, a college student drowned not far from here. Got caught in a rip current while swimming after hours." "That's terrible," I said. "I thought the lifeguards were pretty vigilant." "They can't be everywhere at once," Richard replied. "And they go off duty at sunset. Some folks think they're strong enough swimmers to handle anything, but the ocean doesn't care how many laps you've done in a pool." His wife touched his arm. "Richard volunteers with the Beach Safety Committee," she explained. "He takes it all very personally." "Someone has to," he insisted, "especially after what happened to the Miller girl 3 years ago." His wife shot him a warning look, and he fell silent. Later, as I rejoined my family, I found myself studying the water with new wariness. The waves seemed more menacing now. their rhythmic crash against the shore less soothing than threatening. That afternoon, as predicted, storm clouds rolled in from the Gulf, and the lifeguards began clearing the beach. As we packed up our things, I noticed the same man from the previous day. He was standing about 30 yards away, watching us intently. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away, his gait oddly stiff. The uneasiness I'd felt the day before returned, stronger now. As we walked back to our rental, I found myself placing my hand protectively on Lily's shoulder and walking a little closer to Ellie, who carried Noah on her hip. "Did you see that man watching us?" I asked Ellie once we were inside. "What man?" "The one in the blue shirt, the same one I mentioned yesterday." Ellie frowned. "I didn't notice him." "Are you sure he was watching us specifically?" "There are hundreds of people on that beach. He was definitely looking at us, at me." "Mark, you're being paranoid. He was probably just looking in this general direction." I tried to convince myself she was right, but something deep inside me knew better. As the storm hit that evening, bringing with it sheets of rain and occasional thunder, I double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows before going to bed. That night, I slept fitfully, waking several times to the sound of the rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. During one such awakening, around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps on our deck. I listened intently, my heart racing, but heard nothing more. Still, I got up and checked the locks again, peering through the blinds at the rain-soaked deck. There was no one there, but the beach beyond was visible in flashes of lightning. And during one such flash, I thought I saw a figure standing at the water's edge, looking toward our house. I told myself it was my imagination, fueled by lack of sleep and Richard's stories of drownings. But when I finally fell back asleep, my dreams were filled with dark water and grasping hands. The third day of our vacation dawned bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out overnight. I'd slept poorly, troubled by what I'd seen or thought I'd seen during the night. Ellie noticed my exhaustion, but attributed it to Noah's midnight wakings. "Why don't you take a nap this afternoon?" she suggested. "I can handle the kids for a few hours." I agreed, grateful for her understanding, though I didn't tell her the real reason for my fatigue. I didn't want to frighten her with what might have been nothing more than stress-induced paranoia. We returned to our spot on the beach, which was less crowded than the previous days. The storm had left the sand littered with seaweed and shells, and the water looked murky, stirred up by the turbulent waves. As I helped Noah build a simple sandcastle, Lily approached a tide pool that had formed near some rocks. She crouched down, fascinated by something in the water. "Daddy, come look," she called. I left Noah with Ellie and joined Lily at the tide pool. She was pointing at something partially buried in the sand beneath the shallow water, something that glinted in the sunlight. "Can I get it?" she asked. "Let me," I said, reaching into the cold water. My fingers closed around what felt like metal. I pulled it out and rinsed it in the tide pool. It was a bracelet, a simple silver chain with a small charm attached. As I turned it over in my palm, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the water temperature. The charm was a small silver starfish with the name Emily engraved on the back. "It's pretty," Lily said. "Can I keep it?" I hesitated. There was something unsettling about finding jewelry on the beach, especially after Richard's comments about drownings. "We should turn it in to the Lost and Found," I told her. "Someone might be looking for it." Lily pouted but didn't argue. As we walked toward the lifeguard station to turn in the bracelet, I noticed a community bulletin board with various notices: beach regulations, wildlife warnings, and a section for lost and found items. My eye was drawn to a missing person poster partially covered by newer notices. I pulled it out slightly to read it. It showed a teenage girl with long dark hair and a bright smile. Emily Miller, 17, had been missing for 3 years, last seen swimming at Sanibel Beach. According to the poster, she'd been wearing a silver bracelet with a starfish charm. My hands trembled as I approached the lifeguard, a young woman with deeply tanned skin and sun-bleached hair. "We found this in a tide pool," I said, holding out the bracelet. "I think it might belong to someone who went missing." "Emily Miller?" The lifeguard's expression changed instantly from polite interest to recognition and concern. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, her voice low. I pointed to the spot where Lily had been exploring. "That's unusual," she said carefully. "That area has been searched many times. The police conducted extensive sweeps when Emily disappeared." "So this is her bracelet?" The lifeguard examined it closely. "It matches the description. I should call this in. Still comes by the station sometimes, asking if there's been any news." What happened to her?" "She went swimming with friends late one evening," the lifeguard explained. After the lifeguards were off duty, her friends said they all came back to shore, but when they reached their towels, they realized Emily wasn't with them. By the time they called for help, it was dark. The search went on for days. "They never found her body?" I asked, then immediately regretted my bluntness when I saw Lily looking up at me with wide eyes. The lifeguard shook her head. "The currents here can carry. They can be very strong. Sometimes people are just swept out to sea." As we walked back to our spot, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that there was more to Emily Miller's disappearance than a simple drowning. And finding her bracelet now, after all this time, felt like more than coincidence. That afternoon, while Ellie took the kids to the beachfront cafe for ice cream, I used the opportunity to do some research on my phone. What I found disturbed me deeply. Emily Miller wasn't the only drowning at Sanibel Beach in recent years. There had been 4 others over the past decade, 2 tourists and 2 locals. All had been ruled accidental, attributed to rip currents or swimmers overestimating their abilities. But what caught my attention was a detail in a local newspaper article about Emily's disappearance. Her father, Thomas Miller, a former Coast Guard officer, had never accepted the official explanation. He'd conducted his own investigation, convinced that someone had been responsible for his daughter's death. The article included a photograph of Thomas Miller standing on the beach during a memorial service for Emily, 1 year after her disappearance. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair, wearing khaki shorts and a blue button-down shirt. The same man I'd been seeing since our arrival. My heart raced as pieces fell into place. He wasn't some random stranger. He was Emily's father, possibly still consumed by grief and the search for answers 3 years later. But why was he watching us? Why me specifically? That evening I insisted we eat dinner inside rather than on the deck. I kept the blinds drawn, telling Ellie I was concerned about mosquitoes after the rain. She gave me an odd look, but didn't question my sudden caution. After the kids were asleep, I sat in the darkened living room, peering through a gap in the blinds at the moonlit beach. For hours, I saw nothing but the rhythmic movement of the waves and the occasional passing of beach patrol vehicles. Just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I saw him. Thomas Miller walked slowly along the shoreline, stopping directly in front of our rental. He stood facing the house for several long minutes, then turned and continued down the beach. I let the blind fall back into place and sat in the darkness, my mind racing. Why was he so focused on our house, on me? I'd never met Emily Miller or her father before this vacation. I had no connection to Sanibel Beach or its tragic history. Yet something about me had clearly caught Thomas Miller's attention. Unless A memory surfaced, one I'd buried so deeply I'd almost convinced myself it never happened. Summer break after freshman year of college. A road trip to Florida with 4 friends. A night of drinking on a beach that could very well have been this one. And a young woman who joined our group that night, a local whose name I couldn't remember. Had it been Emily? Had I met her that night, 15 years ago, 2 years before she disappeared? And if so, why would her father be watching me now? Sleep eluded me that night as I wrestled with fragments of memory and the growing certainty that Thomas Miller's presence was not coincidental. The 4th day of our vacation was our last. We were scheduled to check out the following morning, and despite the perfect weather, I couldn't wait to leave. I hadn't told Ellie about what I discovered. I didn't want to frighten her or ruin what was supposed to be our perfect family getaway. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After breakfast, Ellie suggested we take one final trip to the beach. "It's our last day," she said. "Let's make the most of it." I wanted to object, to suggest an alternative like the aquarium or the nature preserve, anywhere but the beach. But the kids were already excited, and I didn't have a reasonable explanation for my reluctance that wouldn't sound paranoid. So we returned to our usual spot, set up our chairs and umbrella, and tried to enjoy the day. The beach was busy again, filled with families like ours trying to soak up the sun before returning to their regular lives. The normality of the scene should have been reassuring, but I couldn't relax. Every few minutes, I scanned the shoreline, looking for Thomas Miller. Mid-morning, Ellie noticed my distraction. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. "You've been on edge since yesterday." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little sad that vacation is ending." She smiled sympathetically and squeezed my hand. "We'll come back next year. The kids love it here." The thought of returning made my stomach clench with dread. As the afternoon wore on, I began to think that perhaps I had overreacted, that Thomas Miller's presence near our rental was just a grieving father's routine, walking the beach where his daughter had disappeared, nothing to do with me personally. Maybe the connections I'd made were tenuous, my mind creating patterns where none existed. Then Noah pointed down the beach and said the words that shattered my fragile calm. "Look, Daddy, it's that man who was watching us yesterday." I followed his gaze and saw Thomas Miller walking directly toward us. He wore the same blue shirt and khaki shorts, his face set in a determined expression. "Stay here with Mommy," I told Noah, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll be right back." "Mark?" Ellie called after me, concern in her voice. "It's fine," I assured her. "Just someone I need to speak with." I walked down the beach to intercept Miller before he could reach my family. As we drew closer to each other, I could see the lines of grief etched into his weathered face, the gray in his close-cropped hair, the intensity in his eyes that I'd mistaken for menace. "Mr. Miller?" I said when we were a few feet apart. He stopped, his expression shifting from determination to surprise. "You know who I am." "Thomas Miller, Emily's father." He nodded slowly. "And I know who you are, Mark Sutton. I recognized you the moment you arrived, older now, of course, but I never forget a face." My heart pounded. "How do you know me? You really don't remember, do you?" His voice was tired rather than angry. "Memorial Day weekend, 2010. You and your college friends were here at Sanibel. You met my daughter at a bonfire on this beach." The memory crystallized. A bonfire with local teens, more alcohol than was wise, a pretty girl with dark hair who'd taken a particular interest in my friend Jason. Her name had been Emily, I now recalled. "I remember," I said quietly, "but that was years before she disappeared." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Yes. But what you didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that Emily was only 15 that night. She'd snuck out to the beach, told everyone she was in college like you all were. I felt sick. We didn't know. No, you wouldn't have. She looked older. But that night changed her. After meeting your friend Jason, she became obsessed with older boys, with parties, with rebellion. We tried to guide her, to set boundaries, but... His voice broke. By the time she was 17, she was regularly sneaking out, drinking, taking risks. The night she disappeared, she was with a group of college boys again. I stood there, stunned by the connection that had eluded me. Not that I had been involved in Emily's disappearance, but that a chance encounter years earlier had set in motion a chain of events that eventually led to tragedy. "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate words for the weight of his loss. "But I still don't understand why you've been watching us." "Watching me?" Miller sighed, looking past me toward the water. "When I saw you with your family, looking so normal, so happy, I wanted you to know what happened, to understand that actions have consequences, even unintended ones, even years later." Before I could respond, a scream cut through the air. Ellie's scream. I whirled around to see her pointing toward the water, panic etched on her face. Lily had ventured out too far and was struggling against a current, her head occasionally disappearing beneath the surface. Without hesitation, I ran toward the water, Thomas Miller right behind me. The lifeguard was already blowing her whistle, grabbing her rescue board. But Lily was far from shore, and panic seized me as I realized how quickly a child could drown. I plunged into the waves, swimming with desperate strokes toward my daughter. The current was strong, pulling me sideways even as I fought against it. I could hear shouts from the shore, the lifeguard's whistle, but all that mattered was reaching Lily. As I neared her, I felt the powerful tug of the rip current. Remembering the safety guidelines, I swam parallel to the shore instead of fighting directly against the current. When I finally reached Lily, she was exhausted but still conscious. "Hold on to me," I gasped, pulling her close. "I've got you." Her arms wrapped around my neck, her small body trembling. "I'm scared, Daddy." "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on." Swimming with one arm while supporting her with the other was exhausting, but adrenaline kept me going. I focused on moving parallel to the shore until we escaped the rip current's grip, then angled back toward the beach. As we neared the shallows, Thomas Miller waded out to meet us, helping to carry Lily the final distance to shore. Ellie rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. Noah clutched tightly in her arms. The lifeguard arrived moments later with her rescue board. "Is she okay?" she asked, kneeling beside Lily, who was coughing but breathing normally. "I think so," I said, still gasping for breath. While the lifeguard checked Lily over, I turned to thank Thomas Miller, but he had already stepped away, walking back down the beach with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. "Who was that man?" Ellie asked as we gathered our belongings, Lily wrapped in a towel and resting in her beach chair. I hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "Someone who lost his daughter to the ocean. He helped me reach Lily." Ellie looked down the beach where Miller's figure was growing smaller with distance. "We should thank him. I think he just needs to be alone right now." Later that evening, after checking out of our rental a day early and settling into a hotel near the airport, Ellie asked me what had really happened on the beach that day. "You were talking to that man before Lily got into trouble," she said. "Did you know him?" The kids were asleep in the adjoining room of our suite, and I sat on the edge of the bed, debating how much truth to share with my wife. Finally, I told her everything, about Emily Miller, about recognizing her father, about our brief conversation before Lily's accident. "It's just so random," Ellie said when I finished, "that you would have met this girl 15 years ago, and now her father is still there, still grieving." "I don't think it was random," I said quietly. "I think he recognized me from photos Emily had kept, or maybe from social media. I think he's been watching that beach for years, looking for connections to his daughter's life. And when he saw me, he saw someone who represented the beginning of the path that led to her death. That's disturbing, Ellie said. Do you think he's dangerous? I shook my head. No, just broken, stuck in his grief, unable to move forward. I hesitated. He could have let me struggle to save Lily today, but he didn't. He helped us. We flew home the next day, the vacation that was supposed to rejuvenate us having left us all subdued. Lily recovered quickly from her scare, already talking about swimming lessons and how she would do better next time. Noah remained oblivious to the drama, content with his new shell collection. But I knew I would never forget the sight of Thomas Miller walking away along that beach. A solitary figure carrying the weight of an unbearable loss. 2 weeks after returning home, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was Emily's silver starfish bracelet and a handwritten note. Mark, I've carried this for too long, along with my anger and my pain. Seeing you save your daughter made me realize Emily wouldn't want this for me, this half-life of grief and blame. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be a father. Take care of your family. Teach your children about the dangers that hide beneath beautiful surfaces. Thomas, I sat for a long time holding that bracelet, thinking about the fragility of life, about how easily joy can turn to tragedy, about the ripple effects of our actions that spread outward in ways we can never anticipate. Then I carefully put the bracelet away in my desk drawer, a reminder of a girl I barely knew, and the father whose grief had touched our lives in the most unexpected way. That night, I held my children a little longer before bed, watched Ellie a little more closely as she moved about our home, grateful for the life we had built together. And when I finally slept, I dreamed not of dark water and reaching hands, but of a beach at sunrise, waves gentle against the shore, and the endless horizon where sky meets sea, beautiful and dangerous and worthy of respect. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd do laundry at 2 a.m. But then again, I never thought I'd be living alone in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland either, surviving on ramen and leftover coffee from my barista job. Life has a way of unraveling your plans, thread by thread, until you're left with something entirely different than what you set out to create. It had been 3 months since I'd moved from my small hometown in Idaho. 3 months since I'd walked away from a relationship that had slowly drained the color from my world. 3 months of rebuilding myself in a city where no one knew my name or my history. Freedom tasted like rain-soaked streets and smelled like the pages of books from the used bookstore where I spent my Sundays. My apartment building was ancient, with plumbing that groaned like it was in perpetual pain, and neighbors I barely glimpsed. The laundry facilities were even worse. A single washer and dryer, both of which had been out of order since the day I moved in. The landlord had promised repairs soon, but his definition of soon seemed to stretch across galaxies. Which is how I found myself, at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, pushing through the glass door of 24/7 Suds, the only laundromat within walking distance that stayed open all night. The bell above the door chimed softly, announcing my arrival to the empty rows of machines. I liked coming at this hour. The solitude was comforting, and the rhythmic hum of the dryers created a white noise that soothed my perpetually anxious mind. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Linoleum floors with mysterious stains, fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally, and the lingering smell of detergent and fabric softener. The back wall was lined with dryers, with washing machines facing them in 2 rows. A small counter near the entrance held a coffee machine that looked like it had been manufactured during the Cold War. and a vending machine with chips and candy stood sentinel in the corner. I had my routine down to a science. I'd bring my book, tonight it was a dog-eared copy of The Bell Jar, and lose myself in someone else's madness while my clothes tumbled in soapy water. 2 hours, and I'd be back in my apartment, clean clothes in tow, ready to catch a few hours of sleep before my 7 a.m. shift. But routines are fragile things, easily shattered by the unexpected. And that night, as I loaded my clothes into the machine, I had no idea that my carefully constructed sense of safety was about to be torn apart, leaving me exposed in ways I never could have imagined. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sorted my clothes, whites in one pile, darks in another. The laundromat's overwhelming emptiness amplified every sound. The distant drip of a leaking faucet, the hum of the vending machine, my own breathing. I moved methodically, measuring detergent with practiced precision, checking pockets for forgotten items. It was meditative, this ritual of cleansing. A moth fluttered against the window, attracted to the harsh light inside, a mirror to my own life, I thought. I too was drawn to this sterile brightness in the middle of the night, seeking something as simple as clean clothes, but perhaps finding something else, a pocket of time that belonged exclusively to me. I discovered 24/7 Suds 3 weeks after moving to Portland. I was walking home from a late shift, my uniform drenched from the unexpected downpour, when I spotted the glow of its windows. Since then, these early morning hours had become sacred. The laundromat was rarely occupied at this time, save for the occasional shift worker or insomniac. That night, though, there was someone else. I hadn't noticed him when I first entered. He was seated in the far corner, partially hidden behind a tall washing machine. A man, probably in his 40s, wearing a navy blue jacket, despite the warmth of the room. His face was ordinary in the way that makes someone simultaneously forgettable and familiar, like you've seen them before but can't quite place where. He didn't look up when I entered, absorbed in a newspaper spread across his lap. I gave him the customary nod that late-night laundromat users exchange, a silent acknowledgement of our shared oddity, and went about my business. The unspoken etiquette of these places was clear: minimal interaction, respect for personal space. I selected machine number 7, my lucky number, and began loading my clothes. The machine whirred to life as I inserted my quarters, the sound filling the quiet space. I settled into a molded plastic chair, opened my book, and tried to ignore the faint prickle at the back of my neck that told me I was being watched. The man in the corner had shifted slightly, his newspaper lowered just enough that I could see his eyes. They were fixed on me with an intensity that seemed out of place. When our gazes met, he didn't look away as most people would. Instead, he smiled, just a slight upward curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. I returned to my book, turning pages without absorbing the words. 20 minutes passed, marked by the mechanical heartbeat of washing machines and the occasional rustle of newspaper. When I glanced up again, his chair was empty. Relief washed over me until I realized he was standing at the detergent dispenser just a few feet away, his back to me. "Machine eating your quarters?" he asked without turning around, his voice surprisingly soft and articulate. "No," I replied, the single syllable emerging more clipped than I intended. "It's working fine." He turned then, and I noticed a small scar above his right eyebrow, shaped like a crescent moon. "I'm glad. These older models can be temperamental. Like people, I suppose." There was nothing overtly threatening about his words, yet something in his delivery made my skin crawl. The way he lingered on temperamental, as if savoring the taste of it. "I guess so," I said, returning to my book, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Instead, he moved to the machine next to mine, though I hadn't seen him with any laundry. He leaned against it, crossing his arms. You come here often, don't you? Tuesday nights, sometimes Thursdays? My heartbeat quickened. I kept my expression neutral, despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. I really need to finish this chapter, I said, not confirming or denying his observation. Of course, he said, pushing himself away from the machine. We all have our routines, our little rituals that keep us sane. He moved back to his corner, picked up his newspaper, and disappeared behind it. For the next 40 minutes, I sat rigidly, hyper-aware of his presence. When my wash cycle ended, I transferred the clothes to the dryer with efficiency born of anxiety. I considered leaving my clothes and returning later, but the thought of abandoning half my wardrobe wasn't appealing. As the dryer tumbled my clothes, I realized with growing unease that the man still hadn't done any laundry. He simply sat, occasionally turning pages of his newspaper, occasionally watching me, and I began to wonder if he was waiting for something, or someone, specific. The midnight laundromat took on a new atmosphere with him there. The once comforting hum of machinery now seemed to conceal his movements, and the flickering lights cast shadows that stretched and distorted across the checkered linoleum floor. I tried to focus on my book, but the words blurred together. Instead, I found myself tracking his movements through my peripheral vision. He had a habit of checking his watch, an old-fashioned analog timepiece that seemed at odds with his otherwise nondescript appearance, every few minutes, as if waiting for a precise moment. The dryer's timer showed 27 minutes remaining. Nearly half an hour trapped in this fluorescent purgatory with a stranger who knew my schedule better than some of my friends did. I considered my options. I could stay, maintaining the pretense of normalcy, or I could leave, potentially confirming whatever suspicions or intentions he harbored. As if sensing my internal debate, he spoke again. You remind me of someone. I didn't look up. I have that kind of face, I guess. No, he said, folding his newspaper deliberately. It's not your face. It's how you move. Deliberate, but always looking over your shoulder, like you're expecting something to happen. The accuracy of his observation sent a chill down my spine. Since leaving Idaho, I had been constantly vigilant, half expecting my ex to appear around every corner despite the restraining order and the hundreds of miles between us. But how could this stranger know that? I'm not expecting anything except clean clothes, I replied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. He nodded, as if I'd confirmed something for him. We all have ghosts that follow us, especially in places like this. Places like what? I asked, despite my better judgment. Liminal spaces, he said, gesturing around the laundromat. Not quite public, not quite private. Places where people pass through but don't stay. Perfect for those of us who prefer to observe rather than participate. The way he said, observe, made my skin crawl. I checked the dryer timer again. 23 minutes now. The seconds seemed to crawl. What do you do for work? He asked, changing the subject with disconcerting abruptness. I'm a barista, I said, offering the minimal truth. Ah, the modern-day confessor. He replied, people tell baristas things they wouldn't tell their therapists, all while you craft their complicated orders with artisanal precision. Once again, his insight was unsettlingly accurate. Customers did confide in me, especially to the regulars who came in during the quiet afternoon hours. Just yesterday, a middle-aged woman had told me about her husband's affair while I prepared her vanilla latte. I'm just there to make coffee, I said, downplaying his romanticized version of my job. We're all just there for something, he said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone that seemed rehearsed. The question is whether we recognize the roles we play in each other's stories. I checked my phone. No signal, as usual in this basement-level laundromat. Another 17 minutes on the dryer. The conversation was making me increasingly uncomfortable, but there was nowhere to retreat in the small space. He stood suddenly, causing me to flinch. But he only walked to the vending machine, purchased a bottle of water, and returned to his seat. As he twisted the cap, he continued as if there had been no interruption. "I've always been fascinated by people's stories," he said, "especially the ones they think no one knows." Something in his tone made me look up. He was staring directly at me, his eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. For the first time, I noticed a small notebook peeking out from beside his newspaper, old-fashioned, bound in leather, with what looked like handwritten notes inside. "Everyone has stories," I said non-committally. "Yes, but not everyone has stories worth following." He took a sip of water. "Some people lead lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau would say. Others," he paused, studying me, "others run from things. Interesting things." My throat went dry. There was no way he could know about my past, about the restraining order, about the night that had finally pushed me to leave. Yet something in his manner suggested he knew more than he should. "My clothes are almost done," I said, standing abruptly. "I think I'll just wait by the dryer." "Of course," he said, making no move to stop me. "We all have our comfort zones." I walked to the dryer, positioning myself so I could see him in my peripheral vision. He had reopened his notebook and appeared to be writing something. Occasionally, he would glance up at me, then return to his writing. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. When the dryer finally buzzed, I pulled my clothes out so quickly that I dropped a sock, which skidded across the floor toward his feet. Before I could move, he picked it up, holding it by the tips of his fingers as if it were a delicate artifact. "You dropped something," he said, extending his hand but not moving closer. I crossed the space between us, took the sock with a mumbled thanks, and returned to packing my laundry with trembling hands. As I zipped my bag closed, I heard him say, almost too quietly to catch, "See you next Tuesday, Eliza." I froze. I had never told him my name. The sound of my name on his lips paralyzed me. Not just any name, my real name, Eliza. Not the Liz I'd been introducing myself as since arriving in Portland. The name only my family and those from my past life knew. I didn't turn around immediately. Instead, I zipped my laundry bag closed with deliberate slowness, buying time to compose myself. My mind raced through possibilities. Could we have met before? Had I used my credit card here with my full name visible? Had I mentioned it to someone else in the laundromat when he was present but unnoticed? None of these explanations felt satisfactory. When I finally faced him, I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm sorry," I said, "but do I know you?" He smiled, that same smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not directly, but I know quite a bit about you. Eliza Marie Connors, formerly of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. 26 years old. Left in quite a hurry 3 months ago, didn't you?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the folding table to steady myself. "Who are you?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. He tapped his notebook thoughtfully. "Let's just say I'm someone with a professional interest in your situation." "Are you a cop?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. No police officer would approach someone this way. "No," he said, looking almost amused at the suggestion. "I'm a private investigator, hired to locate you." The word hired sent ice through my veins. There was only one person who would hire someone to find me. "Ryan sent you," I said. Not a question. "Mr. Miller is concerned about your well-being," the man replied, confirming my worst fear. "He feels your departure was hasty, that you may have been confused or manipulated by external factors." A bitter laugh escaped me. Manipulated? The only manipulation was the 3 years he spent isolating me from everyone I cared about. The only confusion was why I stayed after the first time he put his hands around my throat. The man nodded, as if my anger was expected, catalogued. He painted quite a different picture. Spoke of mental health concerns, medication non-compliance, said you had a history of paranoid delusions. And you believed him? I said flatly. I believe in verifying information independently, he replied, patting his notebook. Which is why I've been observing you for the past 2 weeks. Your patterns, your interactions. You seem quite lucid and functional to me. The revelation that he'd been watching me for weeks made my skin crawl. Had he been in my apartment building, outside the coffee shop where I worked, following me on my walks to the bookstore? That's reassuring, I said, sarcasm sharpening my voice. A strange man has been stalking me, but at least he doesn't think I'm crazy. He had the audacity to look offended. I prefer surveillance to stalking. It's professional, not personal. And what exactly do you plan to do with your professional observations? I asked, glancing at the door and calculating how quickly I could reach it. That depends on you, he said, leaning forward slightly. Mr. Miller is prepared to be generous, financially generous, if you return voluntarily. He believes you two can work things out. There's nothing to work out, I said firmly. The restraining order I filed should make that clear. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or recalculation. He didn't mention a restraining order. I'm sure there are many things he didn't mention, I replied. Like the hospital visit I had to explain away as a falling accident, or the way he'd check my phone every night, or how he'd test me by having female friends call to see if I'd mention it to him. The private investigator's pen had stopped moving. He was watching me with an intensity that was different from before, more analytical, less predatory. If there truly is a restraining order, he said slowly, that would change the nature of my assignment. Look it up, I challenged. Kootenai County Court, filed 3 months and 2 days ago. Detective Sarah Reeves handled the case. He made a note in his book. I'll verify that. You do that, I said, hefting my laundry bag onto my shoulder. And while you're at it, you can tell Ryan that if he comes anywhere near me or sends anyone else, I'll add stalking charges to the existing order. I began moving toward the door, walking backward so I could keep my eyes on him. He remained seated, watching me with that unsettling gaze. One more thing, Miss Connors, he said as my hand touched the door handle. If what you're saying is true, you should know that Mr. Miller indicated he would be visiting Portland himself next week. Something about a business conference. My blood ran cold. Ryan had no business connections in Portland. If he was coming here, it was solely because of me. Thanks for the warning, I managed to say, pushing the door open. It wasn't a warning, he replied. It was a professional courtesy. And Miss Connors, change your routine. Tuesday nights are too predictable. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped out into the night, the sound jarringly cheerful against the weight of our conversation. The streets were empty, slick with recent rain, reflecting the neon signs of closed businesses. I clutched my laundry bag close and began walking, not toward my apartment, but in the opposite direction, toward the 24-hour diner where my coworker Mia lived above. As I walked, I felt the weight of being found. The carefully constructed anonymity of my new life suddenly stripped away. But beneath that fear was something else. A familiar resolve that had carried me out of Idaho 3 months ago. Ryan had found me once. I wouldn't give him the chance to find me again. I spent that night on Mia's couch, my still warm laundry serving as both pillow and blanket. Sleep evaded me, chased away by the gnawing knowledge that my carefully constructed sanctuary had been compromised. Every creak in the old building, every passing car, every distant voice from the street below sent my heart racing. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not run again. I had run once, and it had cost me everything. My family, who believed Ryan's lies, my few remaining friends, my sense of home. I had rebuilt something here, small and fragile though it was. I would not abandon it. Mia listened to my story over coffee, her expression shifting from shock to anger to fierce protectiveness. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone this time," she said, her voice steady and certain. "Whatever you need, we've got your back." The "we" turned out to include Jerome, the owner of the coffee shop where we worked, who had escaped an abusive relationship himself years before. Tanya, my neighbor who taught self-defense classes at the community center, and Paul, the law student who came to the shop every morning for his triple espresso. Over the next 5 days, my support network mobilized with an efficiency that left me breathless. Paul helped me file for an emergency restraining order in Oregon, based on the existing Idaho order and the private investigator's contact. Tanya arranged for me to stay in her spare bedroom temporarily and began teaching me basic defensive moves. Jerome adjusted my work schedule so I would never be alone in the shop or walking home after dark. The private investigator didn't return to the laundromat. I checked, cautiously, with Jerome accompanying me at a different time than my usual visit. But his absence didn't reassure me. If anything, it heightened my anxiety. Had he reported back to Ryan? Was he watching from a less obvious location? Or had my mention of the restraining order caused him to withdraw from the case? On the day Ryan was supposedly arriving in Portland, I sat in a police station with Paul beside me, formally reporting the private investigator's contact and my concerns about my ex's potential arrival. The officer took my statement with professional detachment, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Another domestic dispute, another woman claiming harassment without what she considered sufficient evidence. "We'll keep an eye out," she said, sliding my new temporary restraining order into a folder. But without direct contact or explicit threats, there's not much we can do proactively. I hadn't expected more, but the dismissals still stung. That evening, as Tanya and I walked back to her apartment, I felt a strange calm settling over me. Perhaps it was resignation, or perhaps it was the realization that I was no longer facing this alone. The weight of secrecy, of running, of hiding, of constantly looking over my shoulder had been partially lifted by the simple act of sharing my story. "What happens now?" Tanya asked as we climbed the stairs to her apartment. "I keep living," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I keep building this new life, and I refuse to let him take it from me again." She smiled, unlocking her door. "That's the spirit. Fear thrives in isolation, you know. It's why predators try to separate their prey from the herd." Her words stayed with me as we prepared dinner together, as we watched a mindless comedy on her laptop, as I finally retired to her spare bedroom. Fear thrives in isolation. Ryan had known that instinctively, had systematically cut me off from everyone who might have helped me see what was happening until I was entirely dependent on him. But I wasn't isolated anymore. 3 days later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "Miss Connors," said a familiar voice, the private investigator from the laundromat. "I won't take much of your time." My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you want?" "To inform you that I've withdrawn from Mr. Miller's case," he said, his tone professional, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "I've also taken the liberty of informing him that pursuing you would constitute a violation of the restraining order, which I confirmed does indeed exist." I blinked, surprised by this unexpected development. "Why would you do that?" There was a pause, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, "Let's just say I have certain lines I won't cross. Professional ethics, if you will." "Professional ethics," I repeated, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. Those same ethics allowed you to stalk me for 2 weeks. Surveillance, he corrected automatically, then sighed. But yes, I should have been more thorough in my preliminary research. Mr. Miller presented a convincing narrative. He always does, I said quietly. Another pause. He's returning to Idaho today. Slef, I thought you should know. Thank you, I said, uncertain whether I believed him but wanting to. One last thing, Miss Connors, he added. Your new community, they seem like good people. The kind who notice things, who look out for each other. That's rare. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Had the private investigator actually developed a conscience? Or was this some elaborate deception, a way to lull me into a false sense of security? There was no way to know for certain. But as I looked around at the life I was rebuilding, at the text from Mia asking if I wanted to catch a movie that weekend, at the self-defense class schedule Tanya had printed for me, at the apartment listings Paul had circled for places with better security, I realized that uncertainty was something I could live with. Fear would always be there, a shadow at the edge of my awareness. The private investigator had been right about one thing. I did move through the world, deliberately but always looking over my shoulder. That vigilance was now part of who I was, a survival mechanism I couldn't fully discard. But vigilance didn't have to mean isolation. It didn't have to mean running. Sometimes, standing your ground with others beside you was the braver choice. 2 weeks later, I was back at the laundromat, a different one, further from my apartment, but with better lighting and usually occupied by at least one other person. As I folded my clothes, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the dryer door. Shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, hands steady. I was still looking over my shoulder, still startling at unexpected sounds, still checking my locks twice before bed. But I was also laughing with Mia over inside jokes at work, debating books with the regulars at the shop, learning to throw a proper punch from Tanya. I was existing in the light rather than hiding in the shadows. The bell above the door jingled, and I tensed automatically. Some reflexes take longer to unlearn. But it was just another late-night laundry doer, a college student with headphones and a textbook. We nodded to each other, that same silent acknowledgement of shared space that I'd exchanged with the private investigator that fateful night. As I zipped my bag of clean clothes, I realized that the laundromat no longer felt like a place of vulnerability. It was just a place, one of many in a city that was slowly, imperfectly becoming home. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. I stepped into the night, alert but unafraid, and began the walk back to a place where I belonged, surrounded by people who knew my real name and my real story, and who stood beside me anyway. The prickle of being watched had faded, replaced by the warmth of being seen. The first thing you should know about Millwood is that it's the kind of town where nothing ever happens. The second thing is that when something finally does, everyone wishes it hadn't. I was 16 that summer, the summer of 2023, when the heat wave rolled in and refused to leave. Days stretched endlessly, the humidity making every movement feel like swimming through soup. Boredom was our constant companion, pushing us toward increasingly questionable decisions. That's how 5 of us, me, Ellie, Marcus, Denny, and Caleb, found ourselves standing at the edge of Oakwood Drive, staring up at the infamous Holloway house. "You know the stories, right?" Marcus whispered, even though we were alone on the street. "Old man Holloway killed his whole family in there back in the 90s. They say he used a..." "That's complete bullshit," Ellie cut him off, rolling her eyes. "Nobody was murdered. The family just moved away after the recession hit. It's been empty for years because of property disputes." I nodded, agreeing with Ellie. I'd heard all the variations of the story growing up in Millwood. The truth was probably much more mundane than the myths. Financial problems, a hasty departure, legal tangles that kept the property in limbo. The house itself, though, seemed to encourage the rumors. Standing 3 stories tall with peeling paint and weather-worn siding, it loomed over the otherwise well-maintained neighborhood like a cancer no one wanted to acknowledge. Whatever, Denny shrugged, kicking a stone toward the overgrown yard. Place is still creepy as hell. Caleb, who had been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke up. My cousin said there was a bunch of old stuff still inside, like they left everything behind. That piqued my interest. Everything? Furniture, clothes, photos, like they vanished overnight. I squinted up at the house, noticing how the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the broken windows. The front door was boarded up, but around the side, one of the basement windows was partially open, the plywood covering it hanging loose. So we're really doing this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The 5 of us had been friends since elementary school, bound together by a shared desire to escape the suffocating predictability of Millwood. We'd done stupid things before, but this felt different. Something about the way the house seemed to watch us made my skin prickle. Unless you're scared, Marcus teased, already heading toward the gap in the fence. I wasn't scared. At least, that's what I told myself as I followed my friends onto the property, unaware that we were crossing a threshold that would forever divide my life into before and after. The grass in the backyard reached past our knees, hiding discarded beer cans and cigarette butts from previous trespassers. A rusted swing set creaked in the slight breeze, its chains leaving rust stains on the ground below. The house looked even more imposing up close, its blind windows staring down at us accusingly. There, Ellie pointed to the basement window. That's our way in. Marcus went first, slithering through the narrow opening with surprising ease. Then Caleb, who was the smallest among us. Denny hesitated, looking back at the street. Maybe we should just head to the mall, he suggested, his voice slightly higher than usual. It's getting late. It's barely 6, I countered, checking my phone. Come on, we're already here. Reluctantly, Denny squeezed through the window, cursing when his shirt caught on a nail. Ellie went next, her athletic frame making it look easy. Then it was just me, standing alone in the yard. I took one last look around. The neighboring houses were all set back from the street, their occupants likely enjoying air conditioning and normal afternoon activities. No one was watching us. No one would know we were here. I slid through the window feet first, the smell hitting me immediately. Mildew and decay, the scent of a place long abandoned to the elements. My sneakers landed on a concrete floor covered in a layer of damp leaves and debris. The basement was darker than I expected, the only light filtering through the grimy windows and the gap we'd entered through. This is sick, Marcus whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shapes of old shelving units, a broken washing machine, and what might have once been a workbench. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for a narrow pathway through the center of the room, suggesting we weren't the first visitors. Look at this, Ellie called from the corner, her phone flashlight illuminating what appeared to be a collection of mason jars. Inside each was a dark liquid, long since dried into a thick residue. Probably just old preserves, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. Or chemicals, Caleb added unhelpfully. We found the stairs leading up to the main floor, each step groaning under our weight. The door at the top was ajar, a thin ray of light slicing through the darkness. Denny pushed it open, and we stepped into what had once been a kitchen. Unlike the basement, the kitchen showed clear signs of previous exploration. Graffiti covered the walls, cabinet doors hung from broken hinges, and the linoleum floor was torn in several places. But what struck me most was the feeling that we were intruding. Despite the damage and years of neglect, this had once been someone's home. People had cooked meals here, shared conversations, lived their lives. "I don't like this," Denny muttered, and for once I found myself agreeing with him. But curiosity pushed us forward, room by room, discovering the forgotten remnants of strangers' lives. In the living room, a water-damaged sofa faced a wall where a TV had once been mounted. In a small office, file cabinets stood with drawers pulled open, papers scattered across the floor like abandoned thoughts. It was upstairs, though, where the house truly began to reveal itself to us, and where we made the discovery that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The staircase to the second floor curved elegantly, a reminder that the Holloway house had once been the crown jewel of Oakwood Drive. Now, the banister wobbled dangerously under the lightest touch, and several steps seemed ready to collapse. "One at a time," I cautioned as Marcus bounded ahead, always the first to leap before looking. The upper landing split into two hallways, one leading to what appeared to be bedrooms, the other to a collapsed section of ceiling that blocked our path. Dust particles danced in the rays of fading daylight that penetrated through broken blinds. "3 bedrooms," Ellie reported, peering down the accessible hallway, and what looks like a bathroom at the end. We moved cautiously, aware of the increasing creaks and groans of the old house settling around us. The first bedroom had likely belonged to a teenager. Faded posters still clung to the walls, showing bands and movies from the early 2000s. A desk sat in the corner, its drawers pulled out and emptied. "Whoever lived here was in a rush," Caleb observed, running his finger along the desk's dusty surface. The second bedroom was smaller, painted a soft yellow with cloud patterns still visible on the ceiling. A child's room. A crib stood in the corner, its once white paint now gray with age. A mobile hung above it, plastic stars and moons suspended in an eternal dance. "This is actually sad," Ellie whispered, picking up a small teddy bear from the floor. Its fur was matted with dust, one button eye missing. I wandered to the window, looking out over the backyard where we'd entered. From this vantage point, I could see the entire neighborhood stretching out toward the town center. Millwood looked different from up here. Smaller, less significant. "Guys," Denny called from the doorway, "you need to see this." We followed him to the master bedroom, the largest of the 3. Unlike the others, this room showed more signs of hasty abandonment. Clothes still hung in the open closet, a hairbrush sat on the dresser with strands still tangled in its bristles. But what Denny was pointing to was on the wall beside the bed. A series of photographs, carefully framed and arranged in a grid. They showed a family, mother, father, teenage son, and infant daughter. The same family in various settings: Christmas morning, a beach vacation, a backyard barbecue, normal moments frozen in time. "The Holloways," Marcus whispered unnecessarily. I leaned closer to examine the photos. The father, presumably Mr. Holloway, had a kind face with tired eyes. The mother was beautiful in an understated way, always positioned slightly apart from the others. The teenage son looked uncomfortable in every shot, his smile never reaching his eyes. Why would they leave all these behind? I wondered aloud. Maybe they didn't have a choice, Caleb replied, his voice taking on that storytelling quality he often used when spinning tales around campfires. Maybe they left in the middle of the night, running from something. Or someone, Marcus added with an exaggerated wiggle of his eyebrows. I rolled my eyes but couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. The house felt different now that we'd seen the faces of its former occupants. More personal. More wrong for us to be there. "There's another floor," Ellie announced, pointing to a narrow door near the bathroom that we'd initially overlooked. Attic access. It's getting late, Danny protested, checking his phone. My mom expects me home for dinner. We came all this way, Marcus countered. We can't leave without seeing everything. I looked at the attic door, something in my gut telling me to leave it closed. But 16-year-olds rarely listen to their instincts, especially when peer pressure is involved. Just a quick look, I decided, reaching for the door handle. The attic stairs were steeper and narrower than those leading to the second floor. They creaked ominously as we climbed, one after another, into the unknown space above. None of us could have predicted what awaited us in that attic. The discovery that would change everything and force us to confront the true nature of the Holloway family's disappearance. The attic was suffocatingly hot, the summer heat trapped under the sloped ceiling. Unlike the rest of the house, this space appeared untouched by previous explorers. Dust covered everything in a thick, undisturbed blanket, our footprints marking our intrusion like evidence at a crime scene. There's so much stuff up here, Ellie whispered, her voice hushed with genuine awe. She was right. While the lower floors had been partially emptied, the attic was crowded with belongings, furniture draped in sheets, stacks of boxes, old suitcases, and trunks. It was as if the Holloways had used this space as storage for generations of memories they couldn't part with, but didn't want on display. Check this out, Marcus called, pulling a sheet off what turned out to be an antique rocking chair. He sat in it, causing the floorboards to protest beneath the added weight. Comfy. I wandered deeper into the attic, drawn to a collection of leather-bound books stacked neatly in a corner. They were journals, I realized, picking one up and carefully opening it. The pages were filled with tight, precise handwriting, dated entries that began in 1998. These belonged to Mr. Holloway, I said, flipping through the pages. Thomas Holloway. What does it say? Caleb asked, coming to peer over my shoulder. I skimmed a few entries, feeling uncomfortably voyeuristic but unable to stop myself. Standard stuff, mostly. Work complaints, house repairs, concerns about his son's grades. I turned to a later entry. Wait, here's something. He mentions hearing noises in the walls. Probably mice, though he glanced nervously at the walls around us. I continued reading, flipping ahead several months. He became obsessed with the noises. Listen to this. The sounds are getting worse. Sarah thinks I'm losing my mind, but I know what I hear. Something is living in the walls of this house, moving between rooms, watching us. Last night I put my ear to the wall and heard what sounded like breathing. A collective shiver ran through our group. The attic suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. That's just paranoia, Ellie said firmly, though she had moved closer to the rest of us. Old houses make noise. Pipes, settling, animals. There's more, I continued, turning to the final entries. He started tearing into the walls. His wife was threatening to leave, to take the kids. He writes, I finally found the access point, a small door behind the shelving in the basement. Sarah doesn't believe me, but I've seen the passage. It runs throughout the house, between walls, under floors. Someone built this house with hidden corridors. But for what purpose? Who would need to move unseen through a family home? That's impossible, Denny protested. Houses don't have secret passageways. Some old ones do, Caleb countered, for servants or during Prohibition. This house isn't that old, Ellie pointed out. I closed the journal, my mind racing. The last entry is from April 2006. That's right around when the Holloways supposedly left town. We stood in silence for a moment, each processing what I'd read. Then Marcus, ever the action-oriented one, spoke up. We need to check the basement again, find that door he mentioned. Part of me wanted to leave, to go home, forget the journals and the photographs and the lingering sense that we'd stumbled onto something we weren't meant to discover. But a stronger part was curious, desperate to know if Thomas Holloway had been paranoid or prescient. Fine, I agreed. But we stick together. As we turned to leave, Caleb's foot knocked against something partially hidden beneath a drop cloth. He pulled the fabric away, revealing a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled with dates corresponding to the journal entries. He was recording, Caleb said, holding up one of the tapes. But who has a VCR anymore? My dad does, Marcus replied. In the garage. He collects old tech. Take one, I suggested, making a decision I would later regret countless times. Just one tape. We can watch it and decide if we need to tell someone about all this. Marcus selected a tape from the middle of the pile, dated February 14th, 2006, and slipped it into his backpack. Then we made our way back through the attic, down the stairs, and toward the basement, our flashlights cutting through the growing darkness as evening descended outside. The basement looked different now, sinister in a way it hadn't before. We methodically checked every wall, moving shelves and boxes, looking for anything that might be the door Thomas Holloway had described in his journal. Here, Ellie suddenly called, her voice echoing in the concrete space. She was crouching beside an old shelving unit we had overlooked earlier. Behind it, nearly invisible in the dim light, was a small door, more like a hatch, built into the wall. No way, Denny whispered, backing away. No way are we opening that. But Marcus was already helping Ellie pull the shelf away from the wall. I joined them, curiosity overriding my fear. The door was small, maybe 3 feet high, secured with a simple sliding bolt that had rusted over time. Should we? Ellie asked, looking around at all of us, her hand hovering near the bolt. We've come this far, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. She nodded, then slid the bolt back with a screech of metal on metal. The door resisted at first, then swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. I'm out, Denny declared, already backing toward the basement stairs. This is how every horror movie starts. It's just a maintenance tunnel, Ellie said, though she didn't sound convinced. She shined her flashlight into the passage, revealing rough concrete walls and a dirt floor. See? Nothing supernatural. But why would someone build this? I wondered aloud. And why keep it secret? Before anyone could answer, a sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the passage, a scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. We froze, straining to hear more. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable, a cough. Someone's in there, Caleb whispered, his face pale in the beam of my flashlight. Probably just another kid exploring, Marcus suggested, though he had taken a step back from the opening. Or a homeless person using it for shelter, Ellie added. We should go, I decided, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were, how far from help. Now, no one argued. We quickly slid the shelf back in front of the door, not bothering to close or bolt it. Then we hurried up the basement stairs, through the kitchen, and out a back door we discovered during our exploration. We didn't stop running until we reached the street, all of us breathing hard, looking back at the house as if expecting to see someone watching from the windows. We don't talk about this, Marcus said firmly, clutching his backpack where the VHS tape was hidden. To anyone. We all nodded, making a pact of silence that would eventually crumble under the weight of what we discovered and what happened next. The 5 of us gathered in Marcus's garage the following evening, the air thick with anticipation. His parents were out for dinner, giving us a few precious hours alone with their ancient VCR and the stolen tape. I still think this is a bad idea, Denny muttered, perched nervously on the edge of an old lawn chair. We should have given the tape to my dad. Danny's father was a police officer, a fact that had complicated many of our adolescent adventures. And tell him what? That we broke into the Holloway house and found the crazy journals of a guy who thought people were living in his walls? Marcus scoffed, sliding the tape into the VCR. He'd ground you until college. The screen flickered to life, static giving way to a shaky image of the Holloway basement. The same space we had stood in just 24 hours earlier. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14:06, 2:17 a.m. A man moved into frame, setting the camera on what appeared to be a tripod. Thomas Holloway looked nothing like the smiling father from the photographs. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken with exhaustion, several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. This will be my final attempt to document what's happening in this house. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice hushed but intense. Sarah took the kids to her mother's yesterday. She says, he paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. She says I need help, professional help. Maybe she's right, but I know what I've seen. I know what I've heard. He turned away from the camera, revealing the same shelf we had moved aside, the same small door we had discovered. I've been mapping the passages, he continued, unfolding a hand-drawn diagram. They run throughout the house, behind every bedroom wall, under the stairs, even into the attic. Someone built this house as a cage, with us as the unwitting exhibits. Ellie shifted uncomfortably beside me. This is Disturbed, she whispered. The guy clearly had mental health issues. On screen, Thomas approached the door, sliding back the bolt, just as we had done. I've left food here several times, he explained to the camera. It's always gone by morning. Yesterday, I set up a motion-activated camera. It captured this. The video cut to grainy footage of the same doorway, the timestamp now showing 3:42 a.m. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, silently, the door began to open from the inside. A pale hand emerged from the darkness, reaching for something on the floor, what looked like a plate of food. Holy shit, Marcus breathed. The hand retracted, taking the food, and the door closed again. The footage ended, cutting back to Thomas in the basement. I'm going in tonight, he declared, his expression resolute. I need to know who or what has been living inside my walls, watching my family. I've armed myself. He briefly flashed what appeared to be a handgun, though I don't intend to use this unless absolutely necessary. He turned to face the camera directly, his eyes fevered with determination. If something happens to me, this tape is my testimony. The Holloway house is not what it seems. Sarah, if you see this, I'm sorry. I was right all along. With that, he picked up a flashlight, crouched down, and disappeared into the passage, leaving the camera running. For several long minutes, the screen showed only the empty basement. We watched in tense silence, waiting for Thomas to return or for something to emerge from the doorway. Then, from somewhere off camera, came a distant sound, like someone shouting, followed by what might have been a gunshot. The tape continued rolling for another 30 seconds before cutting to static. No one spoke as Marcus ejected the tape. My mind was racing, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Was it real? Some elaborate hoax? A manifestation of Thomas Holloway's deteriorating mental state? We need to tell someone, Denny finally said, breaking the silence. My dad. No, Marcus interrupted. We don't know what happened after that. For all we know, he found a raccoon nest or something and fired a warning shot. A raccoon that can open doors? Ellie challenged. That takes food. Come on. Maybe it was edited, Caleb suggested. Like, he was trying to make a found footage movie or something. I shook my head slowly. The journal entries match up with the timestamps. He was documenting this for months. So what do you think happened? Marcus asked me directly. You think there's actually someone living in the walls of that house? Before I could answer, a sharp knock at the garage door made us all jump. Marcus hurriedly turned off the TV as his father poked his head in. "Everything okay in here? You kids look like you've seen a ghost." "Just watching a scary movie, Dad," Marcus replied smoothly. "Nothing major." After his father left, we agreed to meet the next day to decide what to do. None of us slept well that night, our dreams haunted by visions of pale hands reaching through hidden doors. The following morning, I woke to multiple missed calls from Ellie. When I finally reached her, her voice was tight with urgency. "Turn on the news," she demanded without preamble. "Channel 8. I did as instructed, my blood running cold as I saw the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Local teens missing after visiting abandoned property." The reporter stood in front of the Holloway house, now surrounded by police tape. "Authorities are searching for 2 teenagers last seen entering the condemned Holloway property on Oakwood Drive yesterday evening," the reporter explained. "Witnesses report seeing the pair, identified as Caleb Porter and Dennis Mitchell, returning to the house around midnight." I stopped listening, my phone buzzing with an incoming call from Marcus. My hands shook as I answered. "They went back," he said without greeting, his voice strained. "Caleb and Denny. They went back to the house." "Why?" I demanded, though I already suspected the answer. Denny, for all his caution, would have wanted to tell his father. Caleb would have wanted proof first. "I don't know for sure," Marcus admitted, "but I found this on my porch this morning." He texted me a photo as we spoke, a crumpled note in Caleb's handwriting. "Went back for more tapes. Need to know the truth. Don't tell anyone yet." 3 days have passed now. The search continues, but no sign of Caleb or Denny has been found. The police questioned the rest of us, of course. We told them about exploring the house that first day, but said nothing about the journals, the tape, or the door in the basement. I'm not sure why we kept silent. Fear, perhaps, or some misguided hope that our friends would return with a simple explanation. The Holloway house has been thoroughly searched, we're told. No hidden passages were found, no evidence of recent habitation, no clues to what might have happened to our friends. But I know what we saw on that tape. I know what Thomas Holloway discovered in his home 17 years ago, and I can't help but wonder if someone or something could live undetected inside those walls for years, watching the Holloway family. What else might they be capable of? How many other houses in Millwood might hide similar secrets? I lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of my own home settling around me, wondering if it's truly just the pipes or the foundation. And sometimes when all is quiet, I press my ear against the wall beside my bed, holding my breath, listening for what might be lurking just on the other side. Because the most terrifying thing about the Holloway house wasn't what we found inside. It was the possibility that what we found there wasn't unique at all.